4,478 meters. By the standards of high altitude, that is modest. Not the Himalaya, not an 8,000er, not even the highest point in the Alps. Mont Blanc beats it by more than 300 meters. In the global hierarchy of summits, the Matterhorn does not rank at all. And yet, people who have never held an ice axe in their lives recognize it on sight. A perfect four-sided pyramid standing on the border between two countries, the silhouette off a Toblerone wrapper, the picture they sell on postcards all over Europe. At its foot on the north side lies Swiss Zermatt, on the south side Italian Cervinia, and both villages live off this mountain. The mountain is not considered difficult. The standard route to the summit gets a moderate grade, 3-. It is not a technical wall and not a project you spend years preparing for. Thousands of people come here every summer. And by the number of people it has taken, the Matterhorn is one of the most dangerous mountains on the planet. The count started right away. On the 14th of July, 1865, a team led by the Englishman Edward Whymper reached the summit for the first time. 7 men. That same day on the descent, 4 of them died. That disaster has been retold so many times that we are going to skip it today. This is about the others, about the hundreds of deaths almost nobody writes about. Since that July, the mountain has taken somewhere between 500 and 600 odd people. Nobody can give you an exact figure. Different sources count differently. Every year it takes another 8 to 10. There have been seasons when the count reached 25. The last 2 died here on the 12th of July, 2026, on the descent from the summit. By the time you are watching this, the number may have changed again. The answer lies in how the climb is put together. The difficulty here is not concentrated in one crux you can rehearse in advance and push through on sheer nerve. It is spread evenly over the whole route. That is roughly 1,218 meters of almost continuous climbing, from the hut at 3,260 meters to the top. Fixed ropes hang on the steepest traverses. The upper ridge is a blade, where every move is made above hundreds of meters of drop on both sides at once. The rock is broken, the stones have a life of their own, and other rope teams are above you, so everything they knock loose comes down. Altitude takes away your speed and your clear thinking. Add the queue of other parties, where you stand in the cold and lose hours, and the fact that alpine weather turns in the afternoon almost on schedule. After that, it is simple arithmetic. A guide with a client reaches the summit about half the time. Independent parties, 1 time in 5. And most people are lost, not on the way up, but on the way back. The summit is in the bag. There is nothing left in the tank, and the descent is exactly as long. Over the last 20 years, something new has been added. The permafrost that held the mountain together like cement for centuries is melting. The rock is crumbling from the inside, and rockfall has become so frequent that in 2022, the Zermatt guide stopped climbs altogether for the first time in a century. And in 2023, the route was closed again. That call was not made by the authorities. It was made by the guides themselves, the people who earn their living on those climbs. There is one more number. Around 250 people are still listed as missing in this area. That is the population of a small alpine village. When the glacier gives up another find, it is checked against a database of roughly 280 climbers who have vanished here since 1926. The mountain returns its own one at a time, and there is no end to it in sight. The 7 stories in this episode are about people this mountain took. The first is about 2 men who knew it professionally, down to the last stone. The Società Guide del Cervino, one of the oldest mountain guide associations in the Alps, was founded in 1865 by Jean-Antoine Carrel, Whymper's rival, the second man to reach the top. A century and a half later, the president of that society died on the very same mountain, the 17th of July, 2015. A man is standing on the summit with an ice axe that was never meant for work. It is a commemorative axe made for the 150th anniversary of the Italian first ascent. Carrel and his men came up from the Italian side on exactly this day, 3 days after the English. The man with the axe is called Ottavio Gérard, and he is the president of the society. He has climbed up here by the same line as his predecessor a century and a half ago, to mark the date where it is supposed to be marked. He is a local, going back generations. Val Tournenche is the valley that runs straight into the south face of the mountain. Carrel came from here, so do almost all the society's guides, and so does Gérard. In valleys like this, the profession of mountain guide passes from one generation to the next, and getting into that association from the outside is next to impossible. The president's job here involves far more than ceremonies. The society runs refugees and bivouacs all over the valley, keeps a museum, is responsible for training young guides, and for making sure clients come back down alive. In the anniversary year, Gérard presents 2 books published for the 150th. He speaks at the celebrations, he speaks on behalf of 150 years of history, and he stands on the summit with an ice axe for a photograph that every local paper will later reprint. About men like him, people usually say one short line: the mountain is his job. For Gérard, it was also the place he grew up and the place he went out to every season. He knew every meter of it, on the Italian side and on the Swiss side. At home, he had a wife and 3 children. 15 months after that anniversary climb, he will die on this same mountain. He will be 40 years old. The second man on the rope is called Joël Deanoz, and he is 36, 4 years younger than his partner. His story begins before he ever went into the mountains himself. Deanoz runs the ski school in Bruy-Cervinia. In a resort village, that job means more than it sounds. The school keeps a staff of instructors, teaches the whole valley, and in winter feeds dozens of families. Cervinia lives on skiing 6 months of the year, and the man who runs its school is in plain sight of everyone. In summer, Joël goes into the mountains. He is the son of a mountain guide, and in his biography that matters more than any other line. In the autumn of 1984, his father, Giuseppe Deanoz, whom everyone called Beppe, put up a new route with a partner on a rock tower in the Grand Rocher Massif, well away from the Matterhorn. A few months after that climb, Beppe was caught by an avalanche on the approach to the Col Serena. Joël was about 4 years old. In the summer of '85, his father's partner went back to that same tower with several Val d'Ostan guides. They climbed the line again and left a cross on the summit with a bronze plaque bearing Beppe's name. Since then, the tower has been called the Guglia Deanoz, the Deanoz Spire. In a valley where dozens of rocks and passes carry the surnames of the dead, that is the ordinary form of remembrance. The man is gone, but the name stays on the map. Joël grew up with that story and chose the same road anyway. By the autumn of 2016, he was preparing for the professional mountain guide course to earn the qualification his father had held. He ran the local mountain race, the Cervino X Trail, and never missed an edition. He climbed with the strongest guides in the valley, and one of them was the president of the Guides Society. By that October, his mother had lived without her husband for more than 30 years. The Matterhorn has 4 ridges and 4 faces, but almost everyone who comes here knows only 2 of the ridges, the Hernley on the Swiss side and the Lion Ridge on the Italian side. For all its danger, a ridge is logical. The line reads from far away. There is a hut halfway up. There are other people ahead of you. The south face works differently. It is the sun-facing side of the pyramid. During the day it warms up, and everything that thaws up top goes down through the same gullies. The Defys route was put up in 1942 by Albert Defys and Louis Carrel. The line follows a rock buttress that separates the south face from the neighboring shoulder of the mountain. By the standards of the 40s, this was an outstanding climb. By today's standards, it is a route most of the climbers who come here have never even heard of. The south side of the mountain belongs to a handful of families from this valley. New lines here were put up over the years by father and son Barmace, Marco, and Hervé. For the local guides, this side of the mountain was both a training ground and the hardest thing you could climb without leaving home. How rarely anyone goes there is clear from one fact. In 70-odd years, 4 or 5 successful ascents of the route are documented. Not in a season, in its entire history. There are no accident statistics here at all, too few people for them to add up. The first solo ascent was made in 2005 by Hervé Barmas, the best-known climber in this valley. There are no fixed ropes here, no queue, no hut halfway up where you can spend the night and sit out bad weather. No tracks from other people to tell you where to go next. There is rock you have to read for yourself, and there are 2 men who do not have the luxury of disagreeing. Whatever happens on a line like that is settled on the spot, with no outside help. Tourists do not come here. The people who come here grew up under this face, the 6th of October, 2016. The season in the valley is already over. The summer clients have gone home. the ski season has not started, the lifts are idle, the village is emptying out. There is almost nobody on the routes, the nights are long and cold, and for the south face that is the best time of year. The cold locks up the ice that runs in summer. That evening, Ottavio, Gérard, and Joël Deanoz set out onto the south face by the Deanoz route. They have no clients with them. This is their own climb, the kind you plan for months and talk over with friends long before you go. For a working guide, days like that are rare. All season long, he moves on someone else's schedule, at the client's pace, on routes he does not choose. The weather those days is right for the face, clear, cold, the rock holding. Neither of them knows this line from a guidebook description. They know it from their own previous trips up here. An evening start is normal tactics for a route like this. You approach the face in the dark so you are at the first pitches by dawn and can get through the key sections before the sun reaches the wall. After that, everything comes down to how fast the rope team moves. They never came down. Neither of them made contact. The alarm was raised from below, from the village, once it became clear that the two of them had not come back. And then came the part that is hardest to bear in mountain rescue work. At night, on a face like that, there is nothing anyone can do. A helicopter will not go into that terrain in the dark. On foot, it is hours of climbing up difficult rock, and any team that heads up there at night simply becomes the second team in danger. Rescuers understand that better than anyone, and it makes it no easier. The valley waited for dawn. The Valle d'Aosta mountain rescue helicopter heads for the south, face the moment visibility allows. A search like that looks routine and grueling at the same time. The machine makes slow passes along the terrain at different heights, while the rescuers in the open doors scan the slope meter by meter. Sometimes it takes days. That morning, one pass was enough. Both men are found at the foot of the route. The rescuers count the meters. Gérard and Deanoz came off the wall somewhere between 3,900 and 4,000 meters. They were found several hundred meters lower, at around 3,600. It was the difference between those two figures that let the rescuers reconstruct the picture. The rope team was swept off the face in the upper part of the route. The first reports disagreed on the heights. Some outlets gave a figure of around 3,500. Discrepancies like that in the first 24 hours are ordinary. The numbers come from different hands. Rescuers read them off an instrument, journalists relay them over the phone, and the precise picture is assembled afterwards. The weather that morning worked against the rescuers. The cloud interfered so badly that the helicopter could not land in Valtournenche. The men had to be flown to Aosta, the regional capital, some 50 kilometers from their home. According to the medical findings, both deaths were instantaneous. Neither of them had to spend a night on the face waiting for help. In this story, that is the only detail you could call merciful. By the middle of the day, on the 7th of October, the valley already knew everything. In a village where everyone knows everyone by sight, news like that travels in an hour. Those who died were not visitors and not clients. The president of the Guides Society and the director of the ski school were gone, two men who carried the local summer and the local winter. By evening, the news had gone out on the national wires. In Italy, the death of the president of the Cervino Guides Society is not a local story. The president of the Valle d'Aosta region, Augusto Rolandian, called it a terrible tragedy. The valley's version of what had happened came almost at once. Lucio Trucco, head of the local rescue service, a man who has been bringing people off this mountain for years, said the probable cause was rockfall. Two possibilities were considered, a fall on the route that pulled the rope team down, or a stone coming from above. The second remained the main one. And then Trucco said two things that almost never stand side by side in reports like this. The first, conditions on the mountain were optimal. The second, the men who died were as prepared and as well trained as it gets. In most mountain tragedies, there is something to catch hold of. They started late. They went out on a bad forecast. They did not have the experience. They cut corners on gear. They climbed the wrong way. They believed a client who said he felt fine. Any accident review in climbing rests on a chain of decisions, and almost always there is a link in that chain that could have been done differently. Here, there is no such link. Both of them went out at the right time of year, in the right weather, on a route they knew. They chose the tactics that are considered correct for that face. They had a level of preparation that only a handful of people in Europe can match. They were not rushing, not chasing a record, and not leading clients they would have to answer for. On a wall of that difficulty, only people who trust their partner completely go out as a pair, and on that count too there was nothing missing. A stone came off the face. The mountain cannot tell the president of the Guides Society from a beginner. Equipment is designed for small stones, not for large blocks. A block that breaks away from the rock at 4,000 meters falls at the same speed for everybody. And how much you know about this mountain does not change its trajectory. For this face, a block like that is not an event. It is weather. The mayor of Val Tournanche said that day that the valley felt betrayed by the mountain it loves so much. For one man in the valley, that news hit in a way it did for no one else. Hervé Barmas, a climber known far beyond Italy, the son of a guide, raised in this same valley. Of everyone alive, he understood best where those two had gone on the evening of the 6th of October. 11 years earlier, he had climbed the same line alone. Gérard had been his closest friend of recent years. They had talked about this climb in advance and at length, going over the line on the south face section by section. Later, Barmas said something about his friend that people do not usually say in an obituary, that Gérard had a wonderful instinct and paid enormous attention to questions of safety, which is to say, precisely everything that route demands. Anywhere else that would pass for a polite formula. Here it is the assessment of a man who knows the price of every move on that face. On a route like that, caution and instinct do the work of a belay. But against a stone coming from above, even that does not work. In a text written in memory of his friend, Barmasa said that finding the right words is impossible. When you lose a friend, they simply do not exist, especially when he is taken from life, from 3 children, and from a wife by the very mountain you are bound to like a brother. A few days later, he announced a fundraiser for the family. The money was collected through the Friends of the Cervino Club, an association created in 1965 for the centenary of the first ascent. It is made up of people who have climbed to the summit with the Society's guides, and by 2022, there were more than 600 of them. Barmas summed up the point of the collection in a single line: to honor those we have lost and those who are left behind. The farewell was set for Sunday, the 9th of October, at 3 in the afternoon in the parish church of Bruy-sur-Vigne, the village at the very foot of the mountain. The church could not hold everyone who came. People stood outside on the square and listened through the open doors. Mountain guides and ski instructors came in the uniforms of their societies, wearing the insignia they put on only for special occasions. So did the rescuers who had worked on the face 2 days earlier. So did the people Gérard and Deanoz had once led to the top. First the choir sang Signore delle Cime, a piece that has been sung in the Alps for more than half a century, when saying goodbye to those lost in the mountains. Everyone who grew up in these valleys knows it by heart. Then, The Scientist by Coldplay played inside the church, a song about going back to the very beginning. An unexpected choice for a place like that, and everyone standing there remembered it. The service was led by 3 men, the parish priest of Val Tournanche, Don Paolo Papone, Don Ivano Rebulaz, and the parish priest of Châtillon, Don Andrea Marcos. In his sermon, Papone quoted the famous climber Patrick Gabarou, who called the Matterhorn a stairway to heaven, and said that both of them had climbed that stairway all the way to the top. Then the parents spoke, themselves, out loud, in front of a full church. The father of one of them said that pain can be beautiful if you join it to joy and keep moving forward. The mother of the other spoke about a son who loved freedom more than anything in the world. That woman was standing in a church like this for the 2nd time in her life. The first time, it was for her husband, a mountain guide. Now, it was for her son, who had been preparing to take up the same profession. 3 weeks after the farewell, several people climbed the Guglia Deanoz, that same tower in the Grand Rocher Massif. Since '85, a cross with a bronze plaque had stood there in memory of the father. Now they left a photograph of the son beside it. They were separated not only by death, but by 2 different mountains and 2 different valleys of the same region. And now they are remembered in one place, on the summit of a rock spire. In the summer of 2017, the vertical kilometer of the Cervino X Trail was dedicated to Gérard and Deanoz. The distance Joel knew by heart was run that year under their names. On the 29th of December, 2019, in Val Tournanche, during the traditional torchlight descent, a bell was unveiled in memory of the Cervino guides lost in the mountains. A bell is not a monument that stands there in silence. A bell gets rung, the Società Guide del Cervino carries on, and it has had a different president for a long time now. The refugees in the valley are open. Young guides are trained the way they were trained under Gérard. The Breuil Cervinia ski school is still there too. This story stands first on our list for a reason. What follows are people who were caught in a storm, who did not get down before dark, who went up alone and without a rope, who disappeared so completely that they were only returned 45 years later. About every one of them you can argue over exactly where it all went wrong. About these two, there is nothing to argue about. They did everything right, and on a face like that, the last word still belonged to the rock. The mountain took the men who knew it better than anyone alive, and it did not let them make a single mistake along the way. On the 8th of July, 2026, two men left Zermatt for the Hernley Ridge. They reached the summit of the Matterhorn and sent word down that everything was fine. On the way back down, they were gone. Sunday, the 12th of July, around 11 in the morning. Altitude, about 4,030 meters, the level of the Solvay emergency hut. Both came off the face. Swiss prosecutors have still not named a cause. A third man saw all of it. He didn't fall, and he didn't get a scratch. He was still taken off the mountain separately, on a long line. One of the two got his name back from his home village. The other was never named anywhere. Not then, not later. Herfeish sits in northern Israel, in the upper Galilee, up among the hills. It's a small village. Everyone knows everyone, and any piece of news makes it around the houses within the hour. People leave places like this to study and to work, and they come back for every holiday. This is where Alam Fars was from. By the summer of 2026, he was 32. He had graduated from the Technion, the country's leading technical university, worked as an engineer at a large tech company, and done his military service. The mountains didn't fit inside that biography. They ran alongside it and took up everything that was left over from work. Fairs had been climbing for years. By 32, he had more than 40 summits behind him. Switzerland, Austria, France, the United States. The list built up season by season. He picked hard alpine routes, and he did them himself, not on a package program where an agency decides for the client when to set out and when to turn around. About his partners on earlier climbs and about any clubs he might have belonged to, nothing is publicly known. The Israeli press wrote about him briefly. An experienced climber with a long list of summits. There's a boring flip side to a life like that, one people don't usually think about. Tickets, vacation days, acclimatization, the weather forecast, gear, and a partner who happens to have the same 2 weeks free. Trips like this take months to put together. None of that would make it into the Swiss paperwork. In the first official report, he would appear as a single line. A 32-year-old Israeli citizen. No name, no profession, no 40 summits. A few hours before setting out on the route, he records a short video for the people close to him. Fairs says into the camera that his end will probably come in one of the mountains. And right away, laughing, he adds, "I'm heading for the summit. If you can't get through to me, come rescue me in the summer." After the 12th of July, every Israeli outlet would retell that line. It was said as a joke, the kind a person repeats dozens of times and comes back down all of those dozens of times. People who take the mountains seriously often say the worst out loud, so it stops pressing on them. Clips like that usually live for a week and get deleted along with the rest of the video on the phone. This one would be replayed as the last one, even though it was recorded as an ordinary hello. Wednesday, the 8th of July, 2026. Morning in Zermatt, and Fairs is already on the approach to the ridge. He isn't going alone. On the rope with him is a 37-year-old citizen of Belarus. Almost nothing is publicly known about this man. No name, no occupation, no word on where or when the two met, or how many routes they had done together. The Swiss reports would fit him into 4 words. They're going on their own, without a guide. On the Matterhorn, that's a fundamental difference. A guide knows the line by heart, keeps the client on a short length of rope, and doesn't let him drift off the line. He's also the one who turns the client around when the client doesn't want to be turned around. A pair without a guide decides everything themselves. Where to go, when to turn back, how long to stand still. And up there, there's no one to argue with that decision. 2 grown, experienced men head up the most famous ridge in the Alps. Not everyone who steps onto the Hernley in the morning ends up on top. Some run out of time, some are stopped by the weather. This pair takes the line all the way. From the summit, Fairs sends his family a short message. "We made it, we're fine, starting down." No alarm in it, just the ordinary check-in of a man whose day is going to plan. It's the last thing they got from him. What was left was the descent. On the Matterhorn, it takes at least as much out of you as the way up, and this pair had to do it the way they had done the whole climb, just the two of them, at their own pace. On the way down, the Hernley Ridge passes the Solvay hut. It stands at 4,003 meters on a narrow ledge right above the Moseley Slab, the highest hut of the Swiss Alpine Club, and, at the same time, an emergency shelter for about 10 people. It was put together in August of 1915 in just 5 days, with the materials hauled up on a temporary cable line. The money came from the Belgian industrialist Ernest Solvay. He climbed in these mountains himself and knew what happens up here to people caught out by a sudden storm. The hut has one rule, and it's a hard one: emergencies only. You can't plan a night there, and you can't drop in for a rest either. You go in when going on is no longer possible. The door isn't locked, though. A shelter you need a key for makes no sense. An emergency telephone only appeared there in 1976. It doesn't get used often, but everyone who steps onto the ridge knows where it is. For more than 100 years, it has held onto that ledge for exactly one reason: so that people coming down still have one chance left. It was no use to this pair. 11 in the morning. By now the mountain has warmed through, the sun is high, and most rope teams have long been on their way down. This pair is descending too, and going by the clock, they're on schedule. 4,030 meters, the upper third of the ridge, another 30 meters or so down to the ledge with the hut. At some point, both of them go off the face. What happened in the second before that isn't publicly known. The Valais Cantonal Police put it as carefully as it can be put. 2 climbers fell for reasons that remain unexplained. No version of events, no theory, not a hint of anyone's mistake, just the fact, recorded. That wording turns up often in Swiss reports, and it means exactly what it says. As of publication, the authorities consider nothing established beyond the fact itself. A fall takes a matter of seconds and leaves nothing behind. Reconstructing it means working from fragments of other people's observations. The Valais Cantonal Prosecutor's Office opens an investigation the same day. That's standard procedure. Any death that can't be explained straight away becomes a matter for inquiry in the canton. Local resident or visitor, it makes no difference. One thing the police state right away: besides the 2 of them, there was a third person on that section of the ridge, a climber with his own route and his own schedule that morning. He hadn't known the other 2 before that day, and had nothing to do with their climb. There was nothing he could have changed, and no time even to grasp what was happening. On paper, he's fine. No fall, no injury, no hypothermia. He's standing exactly where he was standing a minute ago, on his own 2 feet, in working gear, and he can't move anymore. The reason isn't physical. In medicine, it's called an acute stress reaction. A person temporarily loses the ability to read a situation and make decisions. From the outside, he looks intact, which is why the state is so easy to underestimate. On flat ground, you can sit it out. On the Matterhorn Ridge, you can't. Coming down here means your head has to work without a break. Where to put a foot, what to hold, which rock takes weight and which doesn't. Hundreds of times in a row, with a drop on both sides. A man in shock can't do that work. Letting him go down alone was out of the question. On that kind of terrain, the risk is far too big. So they didn't leave him on the route and didn't wait for him to come around. A separate Air Zermatt helicopter came for him. The long line has been standard on these faces for decades. The helicopter hangs high above the terrain, and the person is picked up on a cable dozens of meters long. The aircraft doesn't come right up against the rock, doesn't blast it with downwash, and doesn't risk catching a rotor on the slope. He was flown to the base in Zermatt and handed over to be looked after. After something like this, a person is kept under separate observation. In the official report, he doesn't count as injured and he doesn't count as a victim. But he was taken off the mountain exactly the way injured people are taken off, by other people's hands, without a single decision of his own. Of the 3 who were on that stretch at that moment, he was the only one who came down alive. How exactly the alarm got down the mountain is still unclear. 3 sources describe it 3 different ways. The difference isn't cosmetic. Who called and when decides how much time passed between the fall and the arrival of the helicopter. According to the Valais Cantonal Police and the prosecutor's office, it's unambiguous. The alarm was raised immediately by the man who witnessed the incident, which means the call went out from up on the mountain within minutes of the fall. The outlet Ynet, citing the family, tells it differently. In that version, the alarm was raised down in the valley after fares had been out of contact for several hours. He sent word that everything was fine, then contact broke off, and sometime later, a friend went to the rescue service. And there's a third version. The trigger was the pair failing to return to the Hernley hut by the expected time. Most likely there's no contradiction here at all. Several different calls simply went down the mountain from several different people, and each outlet described the one it knew about. That's how it goes in the mountains. An alarm is rarely raised by one person in one way. None of the versions cancels out the others, and publicly the authorities never cross-check them against each other. From there, the Cantonal Rescue Organization of Valais takes over. It accepts the call and puts an Air Zermatt crew in the air. According to Israeli and Belarusian media, the whole helicopter operation took about 4 hours, and the two were found after roughly 2 hours of searching. For a mountain where the point of the fall is known only approximately, that's a normal stretch of time. You have to look on two sides at once, and against rock, like that a person is hard to spot from the air. When both are found, there's only one thing the doctor on board can do: confirm the deaths. For the Canton's rescuers, the 12th of July, 2026, turned into one of the densest days of the season. Mid-July, here is always the peak, the maximum number of people on the routes at once. From the morning on, 3 helicopter crews and several specialists from the Cantonal Rescue Organization were working in the air. The jobs came almost without a pause. The distances between the peaks here are short, and one machine can visit several different mountains in a single shift. On the Alphabel, 2 climbers were lifted off after getting stuck in high mountain terrain. They weren't going to get down under their own power. At the Nordend, on Monte Rosa, a snow bridge over a crevasse gave way under a group. 5 people were walked to the Monte Rosa Hoot. In those same hours, up by the Solvay hut, the 2 who had died were being recovered, and a man in shock was being taken off the ridge. By evening, the load only grew. Around 7 o'clock, a second wave of calls came in, almost all at once. Above 4,100 meters on the shoulder of the Matterhorn, 2 climbers who had run out of water were lifted off on the line. On the Kleinsdirruhorn, a pair had their rope cut through. They had to be evacuated as well. In the Monte Rosa area, a group of 4 was brought out. In the background, another 7 medical calls came in across the Upper Valais. There was one reason behind the whole string of them, and it was measured in degrees. That day the freezing level sat so high that it stayed above zero even at 4,500 meters. Snow turned to slush, snow bridges collapsed, and on the warmed-up faces, the rock came down on its own. Against a day like that, 2 deaths on the Hernley Ridge went into the general line of call-outs, somewhere between the Alphabel and Monte Rosa. For the rescuers, it was one episode in a Sunday shift. For 2 families, it was the end of everything. 2 days after the tragedy, a word shows up in the reports that appears in no Swiss document: rockfall. On the 14th of July, the Foreign Ministry of Belarus confirms the death of its citizen. In the state news agency's account, the cause is named outright. The 2 fell on the descent because of a rockfall at an altitude of about 4,030 meters. Israeli publications, citing the family, describe the same thing. Their wording is even more direct. Alam reached the summit and died on the way back, caught in a rockfall. The source of that version is one and the same. Witnesses. People who were on the route at that hour told journalists they saw the 2 of them knocked off by stones. At that altitude, from hundreds of meters away, testimony like that is not proof in itself. You see movement, not cause. Whether a rock is flying or a person is coming off, from that distance the 2 are almost impossible to tell apart. The authority handling the case has never confirmed that version. Neither the Valais Cantonal Police nor the prosecutor's office has ever named rockfall as the cause, and since the 12th of July, their wording hasn't changed by a single word. The gap between the 2 pictures is wide. In one, there's an outside force coming from above, and nothing anyone could have done about it. In the other, there's nothing at all except 2 people who went off the face. For the families, this isn't an abstract argument. The version with the stone gives an explanation and closes the questions. The official wording leaves an empty space where the cause should be, and what is publicly known about it rests on the press retelling it, not on a document. A rock explains what happened a little too easily, and that's the weakness of the version. Several different sequences of events fit it equally well, and there is no way to choose between them. There's no one to check it and nothing to check it with. The Valle prosecutor's investigation has published no findings, and this story has no other authority to turn to. So officially, Alem Fairs and his partner have a date and an altitude. What happened between the summit and the Solvay hut isn't written down anywhere. On the 20th of July, the Valle Cantonal police put out an addendum to their first statement. Formal identification is complete. It looks like 2 lines: 37 years old, Belarus; 32 years old, Israel. There's nothing else in the statement. That's the norm here, and it's the same for everyone. Swiss authorities don't publish the names of the dead. It's a question of personal data protection, not secrecy. Relatives are notified directly, and the press gets the numbers. From there, 2 completely different things happen to the 2 men. In Herfeisch, a mourning notice goes out for a son of the village, with his name and his photograph. Israeli outlets pick it up and add details the Valle police didn't have and couldn't have had. The technion, the job as an engineer, 40 summits, the video recorded before he set out. The family talks to journalists, and through them, the world finds out who the man in the second line of the police statement was. Later, he was named publicly by the Swiss ambassador to Israel, who offered condolences to the family of the young man from Herfeisch in the Galilee, an official representative of the very country whose police had not released the name. Nothing of the kind happened with the second man. Not one outlet gave his name, even though every one of them reported the death. No photograph appeared, not one line of biography. His citizenship was established from a passport found on him. The Belarusian Foreign Ministry, confirming the death, didn't give a name either, and it was never heard anywhere afterwards. Nobody can say for certain why it went that way. Maybe the family didn't want the publicity. Maybe back home, they simply didn't write about it. 1 fall, 1 altitude, and 2 different endings. For one of them, a whole village came forward and gave him his name back. The other, weeks later, is still an age and a citizenship to the outside world. This pair set out in anything but an ordinary summer. The mountain had been behaving badly all that season, and it had started back in June. June of 2026 turned out exceptionally hot and dry. By July, the summit section of the Matterhorn had almost no snow or ice left on it. Bare rock where in a normal season there's firm packed snow. Samuel Anthematten, a guide and rescuer from Zermatt, keeps it short. The mountains are crumbling. Anjan Truffer, who runs the Air Zermatt Rescue Service, adds the second half of the problem, and this half is about people. Up there, snow works like road markings. While it's lying, everyone moves along roughly the same way and can see the line ahead. No snow means no markings, and up in the summit section people spread out. Each one reads the terrain his own way and picks his own line. Truffer has one more observation. Parties without a guide are usually tied together on a long rope. It drags across the broken rock, catches on it, and sends stones down. Along the line everyone else is climbing. None of these observations applies directly to what happened on the 12th of July. Neither Anthematten nor Truffer was talking about this rope team. They were describing the mountain in general. Shortly before the end of July, on the shoulder of the Matterhorn, a guide was injured by a falling stone. He had to be evacuated by helicopter. On the 25th of July, 2026, the Zermatt Guide's office canceled all ascents of the Matterhorn until further notice. Alem Fairs and the 37-year-old citizen of Belarus climbed that ridge 13 days before it was closed. 8 in the morning, 4,050 meters up, on the east face of the Matterhorn. 2 Italians have been walking all night to reach this exact point. Now they're stripping off the gear they climbed with and pulling out their skis. Ahead of them is a line people prepare for over years, a slope pushing 50 degrees where you don't get to make a single mistake. Luca Bernini is 35, an instructor with the Alpine Club, and inside that club they call him Careful. He is a few seconds away from the end of the most important descent of his life. Why does a trained skier lose his balance in the very first meters? And what did his hometown do about it afterwards? Piacenza sits on a plain. This is northern Italy, Emilia-Romagna, an old city with Roman roots, banks, cooperatives, and a flat horizon in every direction. From here, it's several hundred kilometers of road to any serious summit, and from the city itself, you almost never see mountains at all. Nobody here is born into the mountains or inherits the guiding trade along with the family name. Here, you have to bring the mountains to yourself. Luca Bernini was born and raised in this city. He is 35. His father, Sergio Bernini, runs a local cooperative called Geocart, ordinary life in an ordinary flatland Italian family where nobody works at altitude for a living. Luca comes to the mountains on his own, and he comes to them late as a grown man. In 2017, he signs up with the Piacenza section of the Italian Alpine Club. The section runs a mountaineering school named after Bruno Dodi, one of those schools that survive on volunteers and have been going all over Italy for decades. That's how people from the plains get into the mountains in Italy, through a club, not through a private guide. The training there runs like a production line, and it doesn't cost much. Bernini takes everything on offer: a rock climbing course, a mountaineering course, an ice climbing course on frozen waterfalls, a discipline where you go up sheets of frozen runoff with a tool in each hand. And he doesn't stop at the training outings. He climbs rock he does via ferrata. Those are equipped rock routes where a steel cable runs along the wall, and rungs are driven into it, and you move along clipped in. He films his own routes and posts them on social media. People who knew him will later sum him up in a single line: a guy in love with life who knew his way around the mountains. In 6 years, he goes from a beginner putting on a harness for the first time to a man the club trusts with other people's hands on the rope. In a city on the plain, that's a rare trajectory. It will take him to the most recognizable mountain in Europe. Only he won't be arriving there the way almost everybody else does. The Alpine Club has its own ladder, and you can't climb it fast. To earn the right to take beginners onto rock, being a good climber yourself isn't enough. You have to take a separate course, pass the technical part, work through the teaching method, and show that you can make decisions not for yourself, but for a group of 10 people, half of whom are holding an ice axe for the second time in their lives. In 2022, Bernini enrolls on that course. He finishes it the following winter. In January 2023, he qualifies as a section instructor. In Italy, the difference between that title and the profession is fundamental. A club instructor is not a mountain guide. He has no professional license, and he doesn't earn money in the mountains. He's a trained volunteer who spends his weekends teaching strangers. His qualification is signed off by an organization with a century and a half of history behind it and hundreds of thousands of members. Claudio Faimali, president of the Piacenza section, describes him briefly: a very capable young man, a promising climber with obvious physical ability and potential. Antonio Vaccari, a member of the club's board, adds a different description: someone who knew the mountains, who'd spent years in the club, who'd shown serious skill on snow and on ice. And one description that would later land especially hard: an attentive, careful man. In the short time Bernini holds the qualification, he manages to work on several strands of the school at once: rock, ice, snow, and avalanche safety. This isn't a weekend hobby. It's a second job stacked on top of an actual job and a family. The big summits are left for holidays and long weekends, when he can get off the plane and head north, towards the Swiss border. And what pulls at him on those trips isn't the climb up the ridge, it's the way down. Ski mountaineering sounds like a compromise between two sports, but it works the other way round. First, you get yourself to the top under your own power, on foot, in crampons, with the skis on your back. Then you put those skis on and ride back down the same terrain you've just climbed. No lifts, no groomed piste. Everything under your feet is something you looked at with your own eyes an hour ago. The discipline has an extreme branch. It's called steep skiing, and it deals with slopes of around 50 degrees and beyond. To picture that, at that angle, a person standing on the slope can reach out sideways and touch it with an outstretched arm, barely leaning at all. A normal ski turn is physically impossible there. The skier turns by jumping, almost on the spot, and every turn is a separate movement with a separate decision behind it. There's one rule here, and it's short. You do not fall. Not try not to, not it's dangerous. You do not fall. You ski the whole line with that knowledge in your head, and it's as much a part of the preparation as the turn technique. At that angle, a person who comes off doesn't stop. The snow is too hard to brake on, and the slope is too steep to catch hold of anything. There's nowhere and nothing to fix the mistake with. The discipline took shape in the Alps in the 1970s. It has its pioneers, and one of them is tied to the Matterhorn directly. On the 14th of May, 1975, the Italian Tony Vallaruz became the first person in the world to ski the east face of this mountain. He started from roughly 4,200 meters and was down in 25 minutes. Over his career, Valerus made more than 100 first descents, and he came back to this face twice more. Almost half a century later, two Italians go for the same line, June 2024. Of all the mountain sides, the east is the widest and the least steep. It faces Zermatt. It's the one tourists see from the viewing platform. But for a skier, it's a hard face to get. And the reason is what it's made of. The north-facing sides hold ice all year round. The east one barely does. It's built of rock, and snow lies on it in a thin layer that strips away after the first warm day. The state of the line changes after every snowfall and every night. Experienced people try it for years and turn around, because there isn't enough snow. And not enough snow means that a centimeter under the white surface there are stones, invisible right up until a ski edge finds them. Estimates of the angle vary. Some sources say around 45 degrees, others give 50 and 60 in places. Everyone agrees on something else. A full descent of this face happens only a handful of times a decade. It isn't closed and it isn't banned. It's just almost never in a condition where going onto it makes any sense. Hence the tactics, which are the same for everybody who comes here. Leave the Hernley hut in the dark, climb the face in the coldest hours, while the night frost still has a grip on both the snow and the rock. Ski down straight after sunrise, in the narrow window between the moment you can see and the moment the sun starts warming the slope. An hour late, and the line is gone. In numbers, it looks like this. One documented descent. The team left the hut at 4:15 in the morning, climbed in the dark, and only clicked into their skis at 8:15 after sunrise. Exactly 4 hours of work upwards, just to catch a window that doesn't stay open long. In 2018, a 60-year-old guide from the Aosta Valley, Edmond Joyusaz, skied the mountain in full for the first time, from the summit itself down to the valley, rappelling the first 350 meters where skiing was no longer possible. Before him, nobody had linked the top and the foot of the mountain into a single line. Tuesday, the 4th of June, 2024. The start of summer down below and the very end of the ski season up top. At 4,000 meters, there's still snow, but it's holding on for its last few weeks. Anyone who wants a line like this goes now or waits a year. Bernini is on the Swiss side of the mountain. He isn't alone. There's a friend with him, a climber like himself. They go up as a rope team, tied to one rope. The partner's name appears neither in the police statements nor in the press, and nobody can put a name to him today. The pair set off in the night. They go on foot, skis on their backs, gaining meter after meter on terrain. They're supposed to ski back down a few hours later. The climb eats the whole dark half of the day. By 8 in the morning, they're at around 4,050 meters. This is not the summit. There are still more than 400 vertical meters above them, and they're not going up there. The spot was chosen in advance because this is where the ski line itself begins. Above it, there is no line. Up there, the terrain isn't something you ski. At that height, they stop and switch over. Off comes the gear they climbed with, out come the skis, onto the boots. An ordinary procedure, familiar to any ski mountaineer, 10 minutes or so in the cold, on an awkward slope, where you handle one item at a time so nothing goes down the hill. Those 10 minutes are the last calm stretch of their day. Below them, the face drops away, and beyond it, a gentle glacier. Those minutes are what the whole night's work was for. The climb here is only the ticket in. The real thing starts when the skis touch the snow. From here on, we have exactly one sentence from the Valais Cantonal Police. The descent begins and stops almost at once. One of the two loses his balance. The cause was never established, not that day and not later. The investigation settled on the standard formula about circumstances that remain unclear. That stone a centimeter under the snow, a patch of hard ice, an edge that catches wrong. At that angle, every version gives the same result. Luca Bernini comes off and falls several hundred meters. He had been preparing for this descent for years. The mistake happens in its first few meters. Not coming out of a difficult section, not on tiredness at the end of the day, not after a summit, right at the start. Between it's working and it's over, there are a few seconds. His partner is left alone on the face. He calls for help immediately from the slope at 4,000 meters. What happened up there before the helicopter arrived isn't described in any statement anywhere. The The Swiss rescue service Air Zermatt gets there fast. It's a matter of minutes, not hours. But by then, nothing can be done for him. The crew can only confirm that he has died. His body is lifted off the face by helicopter the same day. The one mercy in this story: there will be no years of searching, no waiting, no empty coffin. The mountain gives the man back straight away. The investigation goes to the cantonal police in Sion, the administrative center of Valais. The Swiss procedure in cases like this is standard. Establish the identity, reconstruct the timeline, check the equipment and the conditions. No criminal case is opened, because there's nobody to open one against. The dryness of that first statement says a lot in itself. It doesn't even say which of the two came off, only one of them. To the Swiss police that morning, he isn't yet Luca Bernini, instructor from Piacenza. He's a 35-year-old Italian citizen who had climbed to 4,050 meters. The Swiss side will say nothing more about him. It isn't their job, and it isn't their story. His name comes back to him at home, the same day. By the evening of the 4th of June, the news is going round the city on the plane. Local outlets run the surname and the photograph. An instructor from the Alpine Club section has died, 35 years old, one of ours. In a city where the climbing community fits into one school and a few dozen active people, this kind of thing is never somebody else's business. Claudio Faimali, the section president, says the club is shaken and floored by what happened. His wording is dry and administrative. Years of experience, the areas he worked in, the date of his qualification. Not one word about what happened on the face. There's nothing to say yet. The club makes a decision that, from the outside, looks like a small thing. As a mark of mourning, the final outing of the mountaineering course is canceled. The closing trip a group of beginners had been building towards all spring, the main event of their season. The course simply stops. Pietro Agosti, the director of the mountaineering school, answers journalists briefly. Luca was a friend, the pain is enormous. And he says, the thing that's hardest to hear on days like that, accidents in the mountains also happen to people who take every precaution. Antonio Vaccari from the board signs up to that, and adds the only thing anyone could add at the time. Nobody knows what actually happened. There's a message from higher up as well. Antonio Montani, general president of the Italian Alpine Club, speaks on behalf of the whole organization to the family and friends of the young instructor from Piacenza. For the Italian mountains, this is already the third loss in a month. In early May, on Monte Paramont in the Aosta Valley, Dennis Trento died, 41 years old, a ski mountaineering champion. In the first days of June, on a ridge above Champoluc, 27-year-old skier Jean-Daniel Pession came off and died. 3 different mountains, 3 different disciplines, 30 days. Piacenza didn't leave it there, but what they came up with didn't happen in June, or even that summer. It took several months. The school opens enrollment for a new season. Like every club school, it has its own lineup of courses. The instructors get together and decide that condolences aren't going to be the end of it. The rock climbing course is given Luca Bernini's name. Not a memorial plaque, not a stone at the foot of a mountain. A training course that new people go through every year. Italian clubs have been doing this for a long time. The school itself carries a person's name too, Bruno Dodi. Now, one of its courses has a name as well. That's how clubs answer a death, with a line in next year's timetable. In the course description on the section's website, he's described simply, a friend, a rope partner, a strong climber with a lot of hard ascents in the Alps behind him. The same page lists what he'd managed to do in the year and a half he was an instructor. He worked on courses in rock, free climbing, ice, frozen waterfalls, and avalanche training. The list is short and very dense. A man from the plain who came to the mountains as an adult went right through that school in a few years, first as a student, then as an instructor. Publicly, nobody from the club would discuss whether that line was worth the risk, and that's probably the most honest part of the story. Bernini wasn't a tourist, he wasn't a beginner, and he wasn't somebody who'd accidentally ended up out of his depth. He was a grown, trained man with a qualification. He knew where he was going and what it could cost, and he made the decision himself. The circumstances stayed exactly what they were, one line from Sion. What was under the ski that morning at 4,050 meters, nobody is going to establish now. The East Face still lets skiers onto it a few times a decade, and every time it's an event for a small circle of people who understand what it means. The mountain hasn't changed by a single meter, and the rule on it is the same as it always was. And in a flat city on the other side of the Alps, once a year a group of beginners gathers for a course named after a man who once climbed that face in the dark and put his skis on. Most of them will only ever see the Matterhorn in a photograph. In the summer of 2022, the guides of Zermatt did something they hadn't done in 100 years. They refused to take people up their own mountain. It had gotten too hot up there. The ice inside the cracks had melted, and the rock started moving. On the 26th of July, 51-year-old Anthony Ryan from Dublin went up there alone and without a rope, and he reached the summit. Around midday, at 4,000 meters, he fell on the descent. Why, nobody knows to this day. Even though the fall was seen, there were still a few other people on the mountain at that hour. Anthony Ryan was born and raised in Drumnaig, an ordinary neighborhood in the southwest of Dublin, one of those places where neighbors know each other by name, and names get cut down to a single syllable. To his own people, he wasn't Anthony, he was Anto. That's what they called him at home. That's what his friends called him, and that's how the Dublin papers would write it later, as if everyone there knew him personally. By the summer of 2022, he's 51, and he's no longer living in Dublin, but in London. There's nothing unusual about that. There are hundreds of thousands of Irish people in London. Whole generations of Dubliners went over there for work and came home for weekends and holidays. Ryan is one of that huge community, grew up in one city, built his adult life in another. What exactly he did for a living, neither the Irish nor the Swiss sources say. There's no data, and we're not going to invent a profession for him. Something else is known, and it matters more. He has a father, Tony, 4 brothers and sisters, among them his brother David, and he has one pursuit that kept taking him far away from London, again and again. Later, David would say just one sentence about his brother. He climbed many mountains all over the world. Many means years of it, season after season, not one famous summit for the photograph. It means foreign airports, buses to the village under the mountain, and the same backpack you can pack in 20 minutes. For Anto Ryan, mountains sat in the schedule of life, roughly where other people put a job or a house. On the 26th of July, 2022, he sets out on the Matterhorn, alone. His age deserves a word of its own. 51 isn't the age of someone who suddenly decided to test himself on a famous mountain. By 51, a climber has either quit long ago or has 2 decades of seasons behind him, holidays spent in the Alps instead of at the sea, weekends given over to rock and snow, gear receipts the family discusses with a sigh, a body that remembers how a hand behaves on cold stone, a head that counts the hours until dark and usually gets it right. About Ryan himself, only the general picture is known. Which summits those were, the family didn't specify. And that's where the public record ends. No names of mountains, no list of routes. Nowhere does it say whether he belonged to a club, who he'd roped up with before, whether he'd been to Zermatt before that summer, and how many times. Swiss police don't release that kind of thing, and the Irish press wrote about him briefly and respectfully, without going through his climbing record. For a story that ended in front of witnesses, that's oddly little. What is known for certain is his style. It made it into the official police statement. He goes up the Matterhorn without a partner. From the outside, that sounds stranger than it actually is. Dozens of people climb the Hernley Ridge solo every year. Strong climbers and record setters who fit the ascent and descent into a handful of hours. Going alone here is a long-standing everyday practice, not a stunt. And that same habit, moving at your own pace, waiting for no one, and holding no one up, will shape not the fall itself, but everything that happens after it. That summer, the Alps were living a life of their own, apart from people, and it had started back in winter. Not much snow fell, the storm systems passed by, the slopes were bare early, and by June, the high mountains came into the season without their usual winter reserve. Then one of the most brutal heat waves ever recorded settled over Europe. Cities set records, rivers ran low. The same thing was happening up high, only the consequences were different. In London, where Ryan was living at the time, on the 19th of July, the thermometer went past 40 degrees for the first time. Asphalt melted, trains stopped, the whole country spent a day talking about one piece of news. Down below, the heat was an inconvenience. Up above, it was taking the mountain apart. On the 3rd of July, 2022, a sérac collapsed on the Marmolada in Italy, a huge piece of glacier that had been hanging over the classic route. 11 people died, the same alpine July that Ryan was heading into only 3 weeks earlier. After Marmolada, there was nothing left to argue about. The mountains were behaving that summer in a way they hadn't in previous years, and the familiar ideas about a safe time and a safe place no longer held. The Swiss glaciers lost a record volume of ice over that year, more than in any season before it. On the 20th of July, the High Mountain Office in Chamonix, the service that assesses route conditions on the French side every day, put out a phrase that's rare in its bluntness for an official document. Conditions are changing fast, and not for the better. By mid-July, the rock up there was standing almost naked. The snow that normally lies on the ledges until August and glues everything together had gone. The mountain looked the way it does at the end of a very bad September. Those were the weeks his climb was set for. The day before he went up, the Swiss meteorologists got a figure that had never appeared in their tables before. On the 25th of July, an ordinary-sounding probe lifts off from the Weather Service site at Payerne in Switzerland, a balloon with a sensor that rises through the atmosphere and reports the temperature at every altitude. They send these up twice a day and have done for decades. It's routine. The balloon bursts somewhere in the stratosphere, but by then it's already sent everything it had. That day, it takes a long time to find what it's supposed to find. 0 degrees only shows up at an altitude of 5,184 meters. That's a record for the entire period of measurement, and they've been taking them since 1954. The previous mark had stood for 27 years, 5,117 meters, recorded on the 20th of July, 1995. For a meteorologist, it's a line in a report. For the mountain, it's a question of mechanics. That day, sub-zero temperatures started higher than the highest alpine summit. The top of the Matterhorn ended up more than 700 meters below the freezing line, and the whole route beneath it all the more so. Broken rock at high altitude is held together by the ice in its cracks. It works like cement. While it's there, the block stays put. When it melts, the block is held only by its own weight and by friction. Normally, that cement is restored at night, when the temperature drops and everything freezes back together by morning. In those days, that wasn't happening. The mountain wasn't cooling down. Rocks were coming down around the clock, including the hours before dawn, when the route is traditionally considered at its safest. The first to notice weren't the forecasters, but the people who live off this mountain every day, the guides of Zermatt. In the last week of July, 2022, they stopped taking clients up the Matterhorn, not one by one, not as a private decision, as practically the whole profession. Next, they pull the Jungfrau, and on Mont Blanc, the French and Italian offices start turning away people who have already paid and traveled out. They pull the Traverse from Castor to Pollux, they pull the Dent du Géant, and the Guter hut on the classic French route empties out. The reason everywhere is the same: rockfall on a mountain where there's nothing left to hold the rocks in place. The refusal covers both classic lines on the Matterhorn, the Swiss Hernley Ridge, and the Italian Lion Ridge, and all of this at the end of July, in the heart of the season, in the very weeks the whole industry works for and that clients book a year in advance. Giving them up means giving up a year's earnings, handing money back, and explaining down the phone to furious people why their dream isn't happening. And nearly every one of those conversations runs into the same thing. The weather's clear, so what's the problem? The guides did it themselves. There was no order from above. Formally, though, the route doesn't get closed. That's not how it's done in Switzerland. A guide gives a recommendation, the decision stays with the individual. Nobody puts a barrier across the mountain. Nobody posts a warden on the path. You can still walk up to the hut and set off for the summit in the morning. The one time the Swiss actually did close the Hernley Ridge officially was in 2003. Back then, after an enormous collapse, around 100 people were lifted off the ridge by helicopter, and the route was shut for several days while it was put back in order. That, an outright ban rather than a recommendation, has happened exactly once in the whole history of the mountain. Anyone who went up on the ridge in those days saw not the familiar line, but bare, broken rock. In a normal year, there's a snow track along the route, a trodden path that shows you where to go and keeps everyone in one narrow corridor. In the summer of 2022, it simply wasn't there. With no track, parties spread out across the face, each person looking for their own way, and every wrong step sent stones down onto the people below. Protection is a separate conversation. A rope on the Hernley Ridge gives far less than people tend to assume. The terrain doesn't allow you to belay pitch by pitch the way you would on a vertical wall. There are few placements, there's no time, and the queue behind you doesn't wait. A pair moves together, tied to a short length of rope, and if one falls, the second one more often goes with him than holds him. Experienced people know this and say it plainly. On a line like that, the benefit of a partner is almost entirely eaten up by the risk that the partner will pull you off with him. So some of the strong climbers deliberately choose a different strategy. Move light without a rope, as fast as possible. In that logic, speed is also a form of safety. The fewer hours spent under falling rock, the smaller the chance of ending up in the path of a flying block, and the better the odds of getting down before the heat of the day and the afternoon storms. That's how Ryan went. Not out of bravado and not out of ignorance. This is the calculation of a grown man who has his own reasons and his own experience. That calculation comes with one caveat, and everyone who makes it knows it. It leaves no room for a mistake. Tuesday, the 26th of July, 2022. Ryan is on the route. The mountain that day is unusually empty, and not because of the weather at all. It's hot, the sky is clear, and in any normal season there would be a queue here. The end of July, and there's almost nobody on the ridge, a sight that's wrong in itself. But the professionals aren't bringing clients up. The tourist parties are canceled, and the only ones left on the line are the people who came for themselves. He completes the ascent in full. He reached the summit that's firmly established. Everything technically difficult about this climb is behind him. That's how it looks from the top. A man standing alone at the highest point, in the warmed-up air, with a view of the whole of the Alps at once. Then, the descent. There's a reason people say that on big mountains going down is more dangerous than going up. On the Matterhorn, the descent is the second half of the job, and the more treacherous half. You go down with your back to the slope, on tired legs, with your attention dulled, and your head insisting that the main part is already done. Around midday, he's at roughly 4,000 meters, meaning he's already lost a good deal of altitude and covered a significant part of the way back. Midday in heat like that is the worst hour on this mountain. By then, the rock is warmed all the way through, and the slope starts shedding on its own, without any human involvement. An experienced climber on a day like that tries to be down much earlier, and he was moving fast. But that hour still caught him on the mountain. What happened next could not be established. The police of the canton of Valais would put it exactly like this in their statement, without any speculation. He fell for reasons unknown. He was going alone, but not in an empty space. There were other people on the mountain that day, solo climbers just like him, without guides. They didn't know him, no greetings at the hut, no arrangement to meet on the way down. Strangers to each other who happened to be on the same line on the same day. On an ordinary day, they'd have gone their separate ways without remembering one another, and they were the ones who saw him fall. There was nothing they could do to help. On that kind of terrain, a distance of 200 meters is an hour of work, if there's even a way through at all. There's vertical rock between the 2 points, and any attempt to get there quickly means a second person falling. Everything that was in their power, they did immediately. They raised the alarm and passed down exactly where to look. So the rescuers didn't have to search for a missing man, reconstruct his likely route, and comb the slopes blind. They were given the spot straight away. A location named from the face itself is worth more than any calculation from below. A helicopter went along the wall. The Hernley Ridge is an edge between two faces, the east and the north. Whoever comes off, it ends up on one of them. Ryan was found on the east face, more than 350 meters below the point where he fell. There was nothing left for the rescuers to do for him. From the alarm to finding him, a single helicopter run. The mountain didn't hide the man and make his family wait for months. There happened to be several people nearby who that morning hadn't known his name. The first statement goes out without a name. The cantonal police of Valais report it dryly and to the point. A man was descending from the summit alone, fell, and died. No theories, no assessments, no hint of what might have gone wrong. Everything that's known about what happened on the face comes from strangers who happened to be there that day. None of his own people were. The name appears in print later. On the 8th of August, 2022, the Irish press writes that the man who died on the Matterhorn is 51-year-old Dubliner Anthony Ryan. Ireland's Department of Foreign Affairs confirms that it is handling the case and providing consular assistance to the family, the standard procedure when a citizen dies abroad and has to be brought home. His brother David says the words that families say in cases like this, and that here are literally true. Anthony died doing exactly what he loved, and he adds that line about summits all over the world. A whole life fits inside it. He left behind his father Tony and his brothers and sisters, and the weather of that summer didn't go anywhere. The record set by the balloon the day before his death, 0 degrees at 5,184 meters, held for a little over a year. In August of 2023, the same balloon out of Payerne found the freezing mark higher still, at 5,298 meters. That summer, when the Zermatt guides took the Matterhorn off their program for the first time, turned out not to be a one-off glitch in the weather. It was the first of a series. Anto Ryan went up in that very first year. 2 young Japanese climbers set out for the Matterhorn in the summer of 1970. A snowstorm caught them, and after that the mountain said nothing for 44 years. Rescuers combed the slopes and came back with nothing. Masayuki Kobayashi and Michio Oikawa stayed on the missing list until, in September of 2014, a chance passerby walked along the lower edge of the glacier. Where they had spent all that time came to light not in 1970, and not thanks to the rescuers. In May of 1970, Japan climbs Everest for the first time. On the 11th of May, Naomi Wamura reaches the highest point on the planet, and in a single day, the whole country learns his name. For a country that only a couple of decades earlier barely registered on the world's climbing map, that means a great deal. Newspapers write about him for weeks, and into the mountaineering clubs comes a generation raised not on other people's feats, but on their own. Japanese climbing in these years grows fast and hungry. Young climbers have little money and plenty of time and stubbornness, and they start traveling to the place where the whole history of their sport was written, which means the Alps. They don't come for altitude. There is nothing here to compare with the Himalayas, and anyone who has read about the 8,000ers is not going to be impressed by alpine numbers. They come for the faces. The Great North Faces have already been climbed by Europeans by 1970, and that turns them into a trophy. Climbing them proves you're playing in the same league as the people in the books. Japanese climbers of that generation treat those routes almost like a qualifying exam, and on the short list of the Great Faces, there are 3 names everybody knows: the Eiger, the Grandes Jorasses, and the Matterhorn. 7 years later, Tsuneo Hasegawa will climb the north face of the Matterhorn in winter alone, the second winter solo ascent in history. Then he will pull off the same thing on the Eiger and the Grandes Jorasses, and there he will be first in the world. And he came from a country that has no walls of that class at all. By the end of the 70s, a Japanese surname in European climbing guidebooks stops being exotic, and the big faces turn into a compulsory program for the Japanese. But all of that comes later. And in the summer of 1970, 2 Japanese men turn up in Zermatt. According to Swiss sources, both belonged to the French Alpine Club. Their names were Masayuki Kobayashi and Michio Oikawa. Beyond that, almost nothing is known about them. No photographs survive, they gave no interviews, and the people who knew them never spoke about them publicly, not once. Try putting together the biography of a man who went missing half a century ago in a foreign country. This is the era before any kind of digital trail. The archives are paper. School pages online don't exist. Everything written about them was written after the find, after the fact, from short police statements, and written in languages where Japanese names come across as a string of unfamiliar syllables, which is why even the basic facts don't line up between sources. Age: some outlets give 21 and 23, others say 21 and 22. A year one way, a year the other, sounds like a trifle. But by the look of it, that number was copied from one publication to the next, rather than taken from a document. The spelling of the name Oikawa wanders around the European press as well, and in a few publications, it's simply mangled. The month is the same in every report, August of 1970, but the exact day, the 18th, shows up in only a handful of publications, and confirmation for it hasn't turned up everywhere. It's the same story with the route. Most reports state that the two were headed for the North Face, but no documentary trace of that decision has survived. The only lead besides the names is that club. Nobody joins an alpine club for a single trip. It looks as though these two came to Europe for more than a fortnight and meant to climb here systematically. One phrase repeats in every source without exception. Two young Japanese climbers went missing on the Matterhorn in a snowstorm in 1970, and one more detail runs through several reports. They were last seen somewhere around 4,200 meters, shortly before the weather shut the mountain down. That's already the upper part of the mountain, less than 300 meters of vertical left to the summit. By the standards of this mountain, a stone's throw, if everything had been going normally. After that, nothing remains, no witness, no note, no last signal. The story breaks off at exactly that altitude, and the next line of it will only be written 44 years later. The storm settles onto the massif and holds for several days on end. An August front in the Alps rarely comes alone. It wraps the summit in cloud and stays there as long as it needs to. From below, it looks like a ruined holiday. Up top, it's snow, wind, and visibility of a few meters. Fresh snow lies down over rock and over old ice, and the descent becomes more dangerous than the climb. You have to go down over ground that held yesterday and doesn't hold today. While that's going on, nothing can be done. A helicopter can't get near the face in conditions like that. The airflow won't let it in, and there simply isn't the visibility to work against the terrain. Going up on foot in a storm isn't a rescue operation. It's an application for a second accident. On days like that, the service in Zermatt does one thing only. It waits for a window. The window may open in a day or in a week, and it doesn't run on a timetable. And it isn't only the weather. Rescue aviation in Zermatt in 1970 is still a young venture. Air Zermatt had been founded 2 years before the events we're describing by a local pharmacist named Beat Perrin, and at the start it had one helicopter, one pilot, and one mechanic. The winch that lifts a person straight off a face. This company will use that for the first time only in 71, a year after our story. The long cable arrives in 72, a doctor on board in 73. Everything that makes rescue on vertical terrain possible today simply hadn't been invented yet in August of 1970. Word that the two are missing doesn't reach the valley straight away. According to press reports, the missing persons report goes in roughly a week after they set out. For 1970, that's an ordinary interval. An independent pair has no telephone, no beacon, no tracker that lets the family watch a dot on a map. Nobody expects a signal from them at a particular hour. A person's absence gets noticed when he fails to turn up where he was supposed to, and that takes days. By the time a search is finally mounted, the rescuers have nothing in hand but a presumed route and an approximate start date. The point of last contact is unknown. Nobody described their equipment, and the only witnesses are the people who saw the two somewhere up high. They scan the mountain, fly the face, work the likely descent lines and the places where things usually get carried down. They find nothing. No people, no belongings, no trace of a bivouac. After a while, the search is wound down. This isn't indifference and it isn't negligence. There is physically nowhere left to look. The two Japanese climbers move into a category that on this mountain had long since stopped being rare. In Japan, the same news looks completely different. There's no mountain there, no helicopters, no rescue service bulletins. There's a short report. 2 men failed to return from a climb in Switzerland, and they could not be found. Between the words died and not found, there's a gulf for a family, and legally they're 2 different things as well. A dead man means a body, documents, a farewell, a date carved in stone. A missing man means none of that. The family gets neither the person, nor his belongings, nor a spot on the map they can travel to once a year. For years, they sit in a status where they can't close the formalities and can't consider the question closed either. Formally, there is a way out. The family goes to court and has the person declared dead without a body. Almost every country has that procedure in its law, and it's built for exactly these cases. Until the court rules, the person counts as neither alive nor dead. After the ruling, there's a piece of paper, and that's where it all ends. Where he is and what happened to him doesn't follow from that paper. There are a lot of families like that in this corner of the Alps. Around 250 people are still listed as missing here, 250 lines in a police register, and just as many households where the story isn't finished. After that, time does the work. In the first year, the family still waits for something. Maybe the snow will come off. Maybe something will show up on the glacier. After 5 years, they stop waiting. After 10, the story turns into a family legend, retold no longer by the people who were there, but by the next generation. Those who were waiting in 1970 have another 45 years to live with it. The mountain, meanwhile, is busy with something else. The work goes slowly, without pauses, and without the slightest regard for anyone down below counting the years. From a distance, a glacier is a piece of motionless winter scenery. In fact, it's a river, a dense, cold, very slow river. But a river. A mass of ice lies on the slope and creeps downhill under its own weight, non-stop. The speed of that flow is measured in meters a year, sometimes tens of meters, and the ice creeps unevenly. The middle moves faster than the edges, which drag against the rock. You can't see it with the naked eye. In the time a person stands beside it, the glacier won't shift by a millimeter. Everything that ends up inside it travels on with it. It doesn't stay where it fell. It rides, slowly, for years, inside the glacier. And the ice itself works like a refrigerator. The temperature in there holds around 0 and below, and the ordinary processes of deterioration all but stop. That's exactly why things that by every calculation should have vanished without a trace come out of alpine glaciers decades later. Equipment, clothing, documents. A glacier has an upper part and a lower part, and their roles are different. Up top, snow piles up and turns into ice. Down below, in the melt zone, the ice loses ground. It goes faster than it arrives from above. The conveyor takes on at the top and lays out at the bottom. Everything the mountain has ever taken into itself ends up at the lower edge sooner or later. And the count runs not in years, but in decades. There's no speeding it up, and no specialist will name a date. All that's known is that one day it comes. Over the past 30 years, one more multiplier has been added to that. The glaciers of the Alps are retreating. The edge of the ice is moving up the slope and letting out what used to be covered. Finds that once happened, maybe once in a generation, have become an almost regular thing. The best-known example is a Swiss married couple, Marcelin and Francine Dumoulin. They left home in August of 1942 and never came back. The glacier in the canton of Valais gave them up only in 2017, 75 years later, and their belongings and documents had kept so well that identification left no room for doubt. Under the Matterhorn, the same mechanism did its work. In September of 2014, at the lower edge of the glacier, at around 2,800 meters, a climber walks past. His name is never given anywhere. Not a rescue team, not a scientific expedition. A man going about his own business at the end of the season, in those weeks when the summer has melted the ice back as far as it goes, and uncovered everything it could uncover. And he notices something that shouldn't be there. He touches nothing and calls it in. The Valais cantonal police come out to the site. At the edge of the ice, what was found is brought up along with the remnants of equipment. Among them, a boot. The place of the find lies almost 1.5 kilometers below the altitude where the two were last spotted. From 4,200 meters, the ice carried them down to 2,800. That's how far it traveled downhill in a little over 40 years. Working out who this is on the spot is impossible. No documents, no name, no date, nothing that would give an answer right there. The coordinates get recorded immediately. Within a year, the edge of the ice will have moved, and there'll be nothing left to tie the place to. Everything that was brought up, the police send off for examination. At this stage, what the investigators have is simply an unidentified find on a glacier, and the canton of Valais gets several of those in a season. Only a year before this, that very same ice under this very same mountain had given back another person, a Briton, Jonathan Conville, who went missing here in the winter of 1979. He was found in 2013. His story turned out to have such a sequel that we've saved it for the very end of the episode, and we'll close the whole thing with it. Count up the timings. One man the mountain kept for 34 years, the other two for 44, and it released them almost back to back, about 12 months apart. Not an answer to any search, and not because somebody finally worked out where to look. Each one's time simply came. And where those 10 years of difference in the ice came from, nobody can say for certain. It all comes down to exactly where a person entered the glacier and how much of the way was left to the lower edge. From here, the story moves off the mountain and into an ordinary city building. What was found goes to the forensic medicine unit of the Central Institute of Valais Hospitals in the town of Sion, the administrative center of the canton, down in the Rhône Valley, a little over an hour's drive from Zermatt. The specialists have a narrow task: to obtain usable genetic material. Given how long the find had spent in the ice, there are no guarantees here. The outcome can't be predicted in advance. The constant cold helps. The material turns out to be usable, and the profiles can be extracted. But that's only half the job. A set of data means nothing on its own. It has to be compared against something. That's where the list comes in. The Valais police hold a register of people who have gone missing in this area over nearly 100 years. Candidates are picked out of it, by time, by place, by circumstances. The list gives you a direction to search in, but it doesn't give you proof. Only a blood relative can confirm it. The comparison isn't with a card index, it's with a living person who shares heredity with the missing man. Parents are the closest fit for that. By 2015, a suitable relative may simply no longer be alive, and then the find stays nameless. Which means finding, in Japan, the families of 2 young men who went missing 45 years ago, explaining to them what has happened and asking them to give a sample. The cantonal police approach the Japanese consulate in Geneva, and through the diplomatic channel, the parents of both climbers are located in Japan. Somebody walks up to these people with news out of 1970. Exactly how that conversation went has never once been described publicly, and it's probably right that it hasn't. The comparison results don't come back at the same time. The identity of one of the two is officially confirmed on the 11th of June, 2015, the second on the 20th of July. 45 years after that August, both of them have names again. What happened next barely shows up in the public record. The decisions from there on belong to the family, not to the police and not to the press. In cases like this, the Swiss side takes the matter as far as a document with a surname and a date of birth. That's where its work ends. For the family, it means something entirely practical. The line, missing without trace, is replaced by certainty. And all those decades of not knowing are formally closed. What that feels like at home never makes it into any report. At the time, back in 2015, the Valais police made do with one matter-of-fact sentence. Finds like, "This will happen again." And so they did. In 2023, the ice by this same mountain gave up another climber, a German who had gone missing almost 40 years earlier. This story differs from the others in our episode in one respect. There's no moment of rescue in it. There's no minute you can point to and say, right here, there was still time. Nobody knew where to look. Not in 1970, not in 1980, not in the 2000s. There was no phone call, there were no coordinates, and there was no decision taken the wrong way. There was a mountain, a snowstorm, and 44 years of ice between the disappearance and the answer. Time did all the work. Neither the rescuers, nor the police, nor the families had any say in how it ran. The ice has its own arithmetic, and it doesn't ask anyone. 2 young Japanese men came in the summer of 1970 to prove they were playing in the same league as the best. That arithmetic gave them their names back in the summer of 2015. The rest of the people on that same police list are still waiting their turn. On the 4th of August, 2016, 2 British men called down from the Italian ridge of the Matterhorn and said exactly where they were. Rescuers knew their names, they knew their point on the map, and until Saturday morning, nobody could reach them. Peter Rumble and Dennis Robinson were both 67, and they had been friends for nearly half a century. On the Matterhorn, what worked against them was wet clothing, -10, and a wind no helicopter can fly through. They met in the British Royal Navy. Mountains had nothing to do with it. Barracks, a ship, the ordinary routine. That service brought 2 young men together and kept them together for the rest of their lives. Everyone called Robinson simply Robbie, and more than 40 years later, that is exactly how the British papers would describe him, Rumble's best friend. Rumble gave up his officer's stripes for a civilian career and took a job at the computer company IBM. In those years, one of the biggest names in British tech. In the 80s, he moved to Maidenhead, a small town west of London, married a woman named Kay, and stayed there for the rest of his life. A quiet river town, half an hour by train from the capital, with nothing whatsoever in common with 4,000-meter peaks. People knew him for more than his job. He helped out the local youth theater and the scout troop. One of those people who, after a full day's work, still finds time for somebody else's business. He had a family, he had grandchildren, and in Maidenhead, he was one of their own. And there was a second life, one that never quite fitted inside that town. He took mountains and skiing seriously, and he had taken them seriously for a long time, long before retirement, back when nobody called it eccentric. In his 60s, Rumble was still going up, and not on footpaths. Where he went, you needed a rope and crampons. Robbie was built exactly the same way. The Navy only introduced them. What held them together for decades was the same shared interest, and that is rare even among old friends. People meet young and then drift apart. These two never did. By August 2016, both were 67. At that age, most people file the mountains away, under memories, buy a membership at the local pool, and tell the grandchildren how it used to be. Rumble and Robinson kept traveling and kept climbing. After he retired, Rumble bought a camper van. From then on, everything ran on that van. He would get behind the wheel, drive over to Deanoz, and the two of them would set off for the mountains together, straight from the doorstep. Year after year, the same thing. First the road to his friend, then the road to a summit. No expedition preparations, no sponsors, no press releases, two pensioners loading up their gear and driving off. That went on for season after season. Rumble had a son, Andy. Later, when the local paper came to the family, he would say one short thing about his father. My dad was my best friend. Not a father first, a friend. They did practically everything together. And one more line from the son, short and exact. My dad never stopped smiling. In the Alps, these two were not passing amateurs. They had been climbing for decades. They understood how mountains work. They knew what weather can cost. They went on to serious ground, and they knew how to turn back when the weather asked for it. Turning back in the mountains is the skill that comes last and costs more than any of the others. And still, at 67, a person in the mountains is a different person than at 30. The head is the same, the experience is greater, the reserve is smaller. The body takes longer to recover, handles a sleepless night at altitude worse, gives back spent strength more slowly. In good weather, you cannot see the difference at all. It surfaces at exactly the moment the day stops being a normal day. And by then, there is no winning it back. For these two, nothing went wrong for a very long time. Years of trips, coming home every single time. Not one call to mountain rescue, and not one reason to end up in the news. In the summer of 2016, they packed again, exactly the way they always had. Only the address changed. This time they were heading to Italy, to the foot of the Matterhorn. The route they chose is called the Lion Ridge, the Cresta del Leone, the Italian classic. The line people have been taking to this summit for a century and a half. The Swiss ridge on the other side of the mountain is the most traveled and the most crowded. The Italian one is built differently. Steeper, more technical, running on long stretches of fixed ropes that you literally haul yourself up along the rock. There is no crowd here. There is nothing simple here either. About halfway up the ridge stands the Capanna Corral, a small refuge glued to the rock high above the valley. Inside it is a metal box with bunks, no kitchen, no staff. People squeeze in there for the night so they can head up, rested in the morning. That is the whole shape of the Italian route. A day of climbing to the hut, a short night, an early start for the summit, and back down the same way. Everyone coming from below runs on that plan. That summer in the Alps was a hard one. Through July and the first days of August, reports of deaths came in from one massif after another, Mont Blanc, the Aosta Valley, the Swiss cantons. The cause was almost always the same: unstable weather and fast storm fronts that cover the ridges without any warning. In weeks like that, a forecast lives for hours. Whatever they promised in the morning does not apply by lunchtime. On Thursday, the 4th of August, Peter Rumble and Dennis Robinson were on that route. Two men of 67, no guide, on the Italian ridge of the Matterhorn. During the day, it was all as it always was. They climbed the way they had climbed dozens of times before. Down in the valley, it was an ordinary August day. Tourists, cable cars, tables out on the terraces. Up on the ridge, at that same moment, the weather was starting to turn. Between the valley and the ridge, there is nearly 2 kilometers of vertical. Down below, nobody was thinking about it. The storm arrived in the evening, fast and strong, the kind that pulls itself together in half an hour in the Alps in midsummer. At altitude, a thunderstorm is not just flashes and noise. It is water, rain and wet snow driven sideways, finding every gap in your clothing. The two British men were caught in it right on the ridge, where there is nowhere to step aside and nowhere to hide. They made the call themselves. People go silent in the mountains far more often, but these two got through, called for rescue, and described their situation. A full storm had hit them. Their clothing was soaked through. They gave their location as well, their point on the Italian ridge. In other words, they did exactly what a person in trouble is supposed to do: ask for help and say where to look. The call went through, and that was the only thing that worked in their favor that evening. After that, the phone went silent. Contact broke off shortly after 10 in the evening. Adriano Favre, head of the Aosta Valley Rescue Service, would later put it briefly. After that conversation, nobody was able to reach them again. Not that night, and not the following day. The rescue service had the full set. Signal received, number of people known, 2, nationality, age, approximate location, all known. Their condition was known too: wet, at altitude, in a storm, at night. Down in the valley, the helicopters were standing by, with crews and technicians ready to go at any minute. They had information to spare, and machines to spare. The one thing missing was the physical possibility of getting up there. It was not one single obstacle. Darkness. At night, a helicopter does not go in close to a rock face at all. Not one, not anywhere. Wind. The flow along that ridge can strip off not just exhausted men, but a fresh, fully equipped team. Distance, on foot, from the valley to the point, is a full day's climbing, even in good weather. Taken separately, every one of those has a solution. That night, they all landed at once. The most dangerous thing in that call was not the storm. Storms in the Alps in August are common, and on their own, they are not yet a disaster. The dangerous part was the phrase about clothing soaked through. Every mountain layer works because of the dry air it holds inside. Once the fabric takes on water, that air is gone, and a jacket stops being a jacket. From then on, it barely protects you from the cold, and the only thing that helps is dry clothing, which they did not have. That is the first multiplier of 3. The second multiplier is temperature. That night, up high, it dropped to somewhere around -10. Rescuers said afterwards that the readings on the mountain in those days were frankly wintry, and this was the first week of August. Fresh snow settled on the ridge, and the rocks glazed over with ice. The wind drove the snow along the face, and visibility fell to almost nothing. The third multiplier is the wind. It knocks you off your feet, but the more dangerous part is something else. It pulls heat away without stopping, and in a strong flow, the cold you actually feel runs well below the number on the thermometer. Water in your clothes, -10, and a gale, added together, make a situation where time works against a person from the first minute. They did not have much of it, and not one of those 3 multipliers was going anywhere before morning. After that, nothing happened, and that is the whole point. No fall, no avalanche, no rock fall. None of the things that usually put a full stop at the end of a mountain report. The two stayed where they were, and the weather around them did not give a single break until morning. The mountain did not make one sudden move. That night, everything was done by the weather. In official reports, cases like this take up a single line: date, 2 surnames, cause. A dry line, completely routine, and there is no way out of it at all. On Friday morning, the work began down in the valley. 2 organizations joined the search at once: the Mountain Rescue Service and the Guardia di Finanza. In Italy, it is their mountain units that traditionally take part in high-altitude operations alongside the alpine rescuers. The task sounded simple: go up the Italian ridge, reach the Capanna Corel, and carry on past it, find the 2 British men. That day the wind on the ridge was over 80 kilometers an hour. In that kind of flow, a person on an open ridge gets blown off their feet, and a helicopter loses control near the face. Cloud and snow covered the mountain completely. No visibility from the air, none from below. On a day like that, you do not get to the ridge, so 2 rescue technicians went up on foot. Not by helicopter, not by drop-off, on their own legs from the bottom, in the very weather the 2 missing men had been sitting in since the previous evening. They climbed towards the Capanna Corel, trying to push through to the point the British men had named on the phone. They did not make it. They were turned back on the approach. Against wind like that, climbing technique simply does not work. The helicopters gave nothing that day either. The aircraft hung over the valley, came into the foot of the mountain, but went no higher. Up by the ridge, the floe slams into the face and starts to spin. Alpine pilots fly in whether nobody else will fly in. And here, even that margin was not enough. By Friday evening, Rumble and Robinson had been on the mountain for almost 24 hours since the alarm. The second night began, the same freezing air, the same wind, and not one new factor since Thursday. That wall of wind between the mountain and the valley cannot be crossed with money or experience or willingness to take a risk. Of all the days mountain rescuers ever have, those are considered the hardest. Saturday, the 6th of August. In the morning, the sky over the mountain opened up for the first time since Thursday. The break was short and unreliable, but it was enough. A helicopter went straight for the Italian ridge. In the Alps, windows like that get flown without meetings and without sign-off, because the sky can close again at any minute. From the air, the first thing that stood out was the gear. The crew saw 2 rucksacks and a rope along the face, kit lying where kit is not supposed to lie, and you see it instantly. That is what gave them the lead. Not far from it, under the snow, they found both British men. It had been snowing up there the whole time, and the layer over them was about half a meter. That is the answer to why nobody had spotted them earlier, in the rare moments when it cleared. From above, all there was to see was a fresh white slope. By then, the wind had dropped enough for the aircraft to come right into the face. The altitude there is around 3,800 meters on the Italian side of the mountain. About 36 hours passed between the last phone call and the moment they were found. For a person with no dry clothing at that altitude, that is a very long time. There was no need to search the whole mountain. The search ended almost exactly where the call had broken off, at the very point they had named themselves. Not a meter off. There was never a mystery here, not for a minute. No search dragging on for years, no argument over theories, no family holding on to the hope that somebody survived and was sitting it out somewhere. The whole thing fits into one phone call and 2 nights. They were found in a cleft, a hollow in the rock, sheltered from the wind. They had not settled on the open slope. They picked cover, and they picked the best cover within reach. Not a tent and not a hut, a fold in the mountain where the wind does not hit as hard. They were lying side by side. That came from the rescuers, and there is nothing to add to it. 2 men who met in the Navy almost half a century earlier spent their last night the way they had spent most of their lives, together. Favre pointed out one more thing. One of them was lightly dressed, the other noticeably warmer. That detail went round every news report and turned very quickly into a ready-made headline. They went into the mountains unprepared. But that is a picture, not a cause. The storm soaked both of them, which they had said themselves on the phone, and in wet clothing. The difference between a light layer and a warm one stops meaning anything very fast. There were no signs of a fall, not on the men, not on their equipment. The initial examination gave one clear conclusion: hypothermia. They were brought down to Val Tournenche, the Italian valley at the foot of the mountain, the same one the route up the Lion Ridge starts from. There is one more thing in this story you cannot walk past. At the moment of the call, both men were alive, and both knew that help had been called, and that down below they had been heard. Everything after that was decided by the weather. The crews in the valley were ready to fly, but they could not get near the ridge. Between knowing where they were and reaching them, that night, stood the weather, and it did not shift until Saturday morning. In Maidenhead, people heard about it almost immediately, before the news even reached the papers. It went round the national press within a day. The mountain from the postcard, 2 of their own, a storm, a story far too convenient to pass up. Sometime later, the local paper came to the family, and Andy agreed to talk about his dad. First, about preparation. The family pushed back publicly on that headline about lightly dressed pensioners. Andy listed the things the reports had left out: military training, decades in the mountains and on skis, a complete understanding of where his father was going and how it could end. It mattered to the family to say that out loud, not to make excuses, but to give the man his own life story back. Second, about meaning. His son said his dad died doing what he had loved all his life. And he added a line that makes the question, why would a man of 67 want the Italian ridge, answer itself: my dad didn't want to end up an old man in a rocking chair who couldn't do anything anymore. In a newspaper that reads beautifully. Behind it stands a choice he made deliberately, year after year. At the end of August 2016, an inquest was opened in Britain. standard procedure for a citizen who dies abroad. That kind of hearing is not looking for anyone to blame. It establishes identity, place, time, and the medical cause of death. It never turned into a big case, and that makes sense. The circumstances were known down to the hour, from Thursday evening to Saturday morning. Neither the family nor the press made any public complaint about the Italian rescuers. The people who went up on foot that Friday into wind of over 80 kilometers an hour did everything that was humanly possible. In the mountains, human strength sometimes simply is not enough. That is nobody's fault. It is a condition of the problem, and Rumble and Robinson knew it just as well as the rescuers did. In August of 2013, a helicopter pilot spotted abandoned climbing gear below the north face of the Matterhorn. Sewn into the collar of a jacket, one label had survived, a single word, a surname. There was nothing else to go on. No first name, no year, no country. The man who had worn that jacket was taken by the mountain on the 28th of December, 1979, on the way down, 3 days before the end of the year. No body was found at the time, and the search turned up nothing. 34 years later, a Swiss forensic pathologist read that surname, and within a few minutes, she knew exactly who he was. What helped her wasn't the police, and it wasn't an archive. It was what his own family had spent all those years doing. This is the last story of the episode, and it ends differently from everyone before it. In London, on the 2nd of December, 1952, Michael and Anne Conville have a son. They name him Jonathan. 2 girls follow, Katrina and Melissa, both younger than their brother. 6 decades later, both of them will fly to Switzerland to identify his belongings. It's a comfortable family, and the boy's road is drawn out for him well in advance. From the age of 7, he lives at boarding schools, first a prep school, then Marlborough College, one of those English institutions that hand a teenager the right posture and the right connections for the rest of his life. From that age on, home is somewhere he visits in the holidays. Jonathan goes all the way through that system and never takes to it. Childhood friends remember him as fearless and a natural athlete, but a desk is far too small for him. He lives on the sports field and beyond the school fence, not in the classroom. His father works in pharmaceuticals. Following him would have made perfect sense. A stable industry, connections already in place. His son isn't interested in the slightest. Instead, he takes a year out and heads for Nepal and India. For a young Briton in the early 70s, that isn't a tourist route yet. It's a real journey. Cheap buses, a language he doesn't speak, months away from home. And that's where he sees the Himalaya in the flesh for the first time. The whole thing, from the foot right up to the snow. He comes home with an interest that will never leave him again. It doesn't look like a passing phase. He knows quite precisely where he wants to spend his life. There's only one problem. He has no profession that fits, and up in the mountains, wanting it isn't enough, so he goes about learning it in the most British way available. He joins the army, the parachute regiment. The service gives him what school never did, an environment where stamina counts for more than neat handwriting. His mates give him a nickname, the Giant, partly for his height, partly for the way he fills whatever room he walks into. There's a story from that period the family still enjoys telling. Somebody bet Jonathan he couldn't climb a flagpole about 30 meters high. He climbed it. By all accounts, he won the bet, but the whole thing ended with an ambulance being called. It's an accurate portrait. With him, the appetite always ran a little ahead of the calculation, and everyone around him could see it. He leaves the army and takes the step that ends up shaping everything else. He gets onto a group course with Outward Bound at Loch Isle in Scotland. Outward Bound is a system that teaches teenagers and young adults how to handle wild country, cold, water, long crossings, working on a rope with strangers. That's where Jonathan first picks up mountain skills in proper order, simple to hard. Until then, it had all come in snatches, from friends at weekends. The course works like a switch. He realizes he wants to teach this to other people, and that, as it turns out, people get paid for doing exactly that. By 1979, he's standing on the other side of it himself, working as an instructor for that same Outward Bound, at that same Loch Isle. He's 27 years old, and he's a professional in a field where not long ago he was the student. On paper, his life is finally lined up. Instructing alone isn't enough for him. That same year, Jonathan enrolls at IM Marsh College to earn a full teaching qualification in physical education. And one detail tells you more about the man than any reference letter ever could. Every evening, he runs out of the college and covers 5 miles to the university climbing wall in Liverpool. He climbs there, then goes to the gym. Then he runs the same 5 miles back. Not once a week, evening after evening. That isn't how you love the mountains as a hobby. That's how you prepare for something specific, and he knows exactly what. In summer, he goes to the Alps, and his roots keep getting more serious. The west face of the Aiguille de Blétière, the north face of the Petit Dreux, one of those sheer granite slabs above Chamonix that really only suit the properly prepared. Mont Blanc du Tacoul. Every trip raises the bar again. He's moving towards the narrow circle that defined British climbing at the end of the 70s. A generation of young men who moved fast, moved light, and were willing to take risks. A few names from it will become legendary, and a few will disappear in the mountains before they turn 40. Getting into that circle was possible, but not on summer routes. The ticket was winter faces. In summer, a big wall is sport and technique. In winter, it turns into a different problem altogether. Ice instead of cracks, a short day. Temperatures at which a human being stops being able to function within a few hours. Anyone who had taken a serious face in winter spoke to that circle as an equal. That was the conversation Jonathan was training for. Out of all the options, he settles on the north face of the Matterhorn. That face was first climbed only in 1931 by the Schmid brothers, Tony and Franz, and it still counts among the most serious north faces in the Alps. The first winter ascent came later still, in 1962, 17 years before Jonathan. The north side is colder than the south for a simple reason. The sun barely reaches it. In summer, that's an advantage because the ice holds the rock in place. In winter, it turns into an unbroken test of cold, one in which fingers lose feeling faster than a climber can get a piece of protection in. And the face itself is built so that there's almost nowhere solid to anchor. The rock lies in layers, unreliable, and what looks like solid stone often turns out to be a stack of plates piled one on another. On top of that, the winter daylight. At the end of December, at that latitude, it's light from 8 in the morning until 5 in the evening, and that's down in the valley. On a face turned away from the sun, there's noticeably less. Any delay at all, a jammed rope, a wrong line, an extra hour on a hard section, automatically means a night out in a place where sitting down isn't possible. To a 27-year-old Briton who runs 10 miles an evening just to reach a climbing wall, all of that reads not as a warning, but as a job description. In his world, that was precisely what earned respect. He goes as one of a pair. Who the second man was, we can't say. Different publications name a different partner, so we won't give a name here. What is known is something else. There's no senior man in that rope team. Neither one is leading the other, and there's nobody here whose experience can cover a partner's mistake. December of 79. He doesn't spend in the Alps. Jonathan is home for Christmas with his parents and his sisters. An ordinary English week, the kind this family had had plenty of. The table, the talk, everyone alive, and everyone in the same room. Neither Katrina nor Melissa will be able to remember anything remarkable about those days afterwards, because there wasn't anything remarkable about them. The family knows about the trip, but they know it as another job for a grown son who makes his living in the mountains and goes off to them regularly. He's an instructor. He does this professionally. It doesn't occur to anybody to see him off any differently than usual. A few days after the holiday, he's already standing below the north face of the Matterhorn. Less than a week passes between the family table and the foot of a winter wall. The pair start up the route right at the end of December. What happens on the face after that is known only in outline. There are no witnesses apart from the two of them, and only one of them was able to tell it afterwards. It's known that they gain height and that they don't reach the summit. The weather turns. Turning around on a winter face isn't a retreat. It's a separate job, and in sheer effort, it can be harder than the climb. You go up because you chose to. You go down because there's no choice left, and you do it in worsening conditions, carrying the tiredness you collected on the way up. Overground, you have to read all over again on the way down. They turn around and start down. And from there, everything comes down to one thing: how carefully two exhausted men can rig a rope on poor rock, in the cold, in fading light. That job asks for more experience than they have between them. The 28th of December, 79. The pair work their way down pitch by pitch on the same system we've already talked about today. Rope, anchor, descend, next anchor. On good rock, that's routine. On broken rock, every anchor is a bet. and you place that bet dozens of times on the way down. Jonathan is standing on a rock ledge. What's under his feet isn't a hold and isn't a piece of protection. It's a floor, a flat spot where you can stand up straight, get your breath back, and sort the ropes out. Ledges like that are what passes for rest on a route. Nobody tests a floor for strength. That's what makes it a floor. Except that here, the assumption doesn't hold. The rock lies in layers. Ice sits between the layers, and the whole thing holds together exactly as long as the ice is there. From the outside, not one of those seams is visible. The ledge slides off the face. After that, it takes seconds. Jonathan goes with it. He didn't slip, he didn't miss a hold, and he didn't get his protection wrong. The mountain simply ran out underneath him. The second man is left above, alive, on a winter face, with no rope team and no way down on his own. Rescuers take him off. The single-line English-language sources give on the subject reads, "His friend had to be rescued. Jonathan isn't found." Not that day, not that winter, not the following summer when the snow pulls back and the face opens up. The search runs into one thing. In terrain like that, looking for a man means looking for him inside a glacier. And in '79, the glacier gives nothing back. The family is left without a single object. No jacket, no ice axe, no tag. Out of the lives of two parents and two sisters, a person simply vanishes, and there everything stops. Back in England, there's a woman sitting and writing letters. Anne Conville, Jonathan's mother, sends them to the Zermatt police for weeks on end. She writes to a mountain rescuer who worked in the area as well. The content is roughly the same in all of them. Is there any news? Has anything else come to light? Are you certain everything was searched? The reason is simple. Until somebody puts proof in front of her, hope can't be closed all the way. Her reason understands perfectly well that a man who went down off that face at the end of December did not survive. But reason and a mother aren't always the same authority. The answer she's waiting for never arrives. That answer simply doesn't exist. Melissa Conville will later put it calmly and precisely. The fact that there was no body and no funeral made all of it harder, not sadder, harder. A funeral has a purely practical function. It sets a date, and after that date the loss is officially acknowledged and you can begin living with it. This family doesn't have that date. Katrina Tay feels it differently. She says the Matterhorn seemed to her like a perfect grave for her brother. He died where he wanted to be. The mountain is huge, it's clean, and on the whole, it's worthy of him. For a long time, Katrina doesn't actually want him found at all. And so, they live. Two sisters, two opposite feelings. One shared emptiness in the middle. The years pass, the family carries on, and the question of what to do with all this next doesn't go anywhere. And at some point, the Convilles do something you don't usually expect from a family broken by grief. The father, Michael Conville, and his brother David Conville set up a charitable trust in Jonathan's name. The work begins not long after the loss, and the trust is formally registered in 1986. David Conville is a man of the theater, not of the mountains, and he'll later receive the Order of the British Empire for his work. In this story, he matters as the second adult who took the whole idea onto his shoulders. The trust patron is Sir Chris Bonington, at that point the most famous living British mountaineer. His name opens doors and brings in money. Later, Andy Cave will become a second patron. The trust has one idea, and it's a very narrow one. Young people between 18 and 30 want the mountains just as badly as Jonathan wanted them, and they run straight into the cost of training. A proper course with a professional instructor is expensive. The trust covers half the price. The courses are run by Plas Y Brennan, the British National Mountain Centre in Snowdonia, Rock in North Wales, winter skills in the Cairngorms in Scotland in January, alpine courses in the Chamonix Valley in June and July. Bonington, for his part, spends years giving public lectures for the trust, and the money raised at them goes to the same place, paying for somebody else's training. What they teach there isn't heroism. They teach ice axe and crampons, moving on a glacier, working with a rope, judging avalanche risk, planning a route, and, above all, making decisions, knowing when to turn back. There's nothing spectacular anywhere on that list. Not a single summit, not a single record, just safety from start to finish. And that is exactly why the trust works. The trust, incidentally, puts it without any softening at all. Its own material says plainly that Jonathan's life ended because he lacked the experience and the training. That isn't an accusation against the man who died. It's a family's assessment of itself, from people who decided an honest sentence was more useful than a beautiful one. Over the following decades, the number of people who pass through those subsidized courses will run into the thousands. By 2013, the trust has been going for more than a quarter of a century and lives a life entirely of its own, an annual cycle of applications, trips, and reports. That work has long had nothing directly to do with the Matterhorn, or with Switzerland at all. And on the face itself, over those same years, something is underway that has no deadline and nobody carrying it out. The ice moves its dead downhill a few meters a year. We went through the mechanics of that in detail earlier today, in the story of the two Japanese climbers, so we won't repeat it. We'll just give the result. What went into the ice high on the face at the end of December comes back out at the bottom by August of 2013, right at the snout of the glacier. On the 21st of August, 2013, an Air Zermatt helicopter is flying below the north face. Gerald Biner is at the controls. He started out as an apprentice mechanic in Saan, learned to fly in Canada, and came back to Zermatt as a young pilot. Over 40 years, he'll build up several thousand flights, and from 2011 to 2023, he'll run the company. A man who has lifted so many people off these faces that he stopped counting them long ago. He notices objects at the edge of the retreating ice. Not rocks, not rubbish. Climbing equipment. There's nowhere for it to have come from. Below the face, out on bare ice, there are no camps of any kind. Then comes the inventory. Among the items, an ice axe and crampons. Clothing, a jacket, trousers. Along with the clothing, remains. And there, in the fabric, a sewn-in name tape with a single word on it, a surname, Conville. In Britain, anybody who's been through boarding school recognizes that scrap of fabric without needing it explained. Tapes like that get sewn into the clothes of a child being sent away from home, so that nothing goes missing in the shared laundry. A piece of cloth the size of a fingernail lay in a glacier for 34 years, traveled who knows how many hundreds of meters inside it, and stayed readable. At this point, nobody yet knows who Conville is. There's a surname, and there's a set of objects that clearly belong to the 70s. The find is packed up and taken down. The material goes to the forensic pathologist Bettina Schrag. At first glance, her task looks hopeless. Remains, equipment that spent a third of a century in a glacier, and one word on a name tape. That's the entire set of starting data. Nothing in it says a thing about which country this man once traveled to Zermatt from. He could turn out to be anyone. The list of people who went up this mountain, never came back, and were never found, runs to hundreds of surnames. And Schrag does what any one of us would have done in her place. She types the surname into a search box. The first thing the internet returns for the word Conville alongside mountains is the website of a British charitable trust. Course schedules, how to apply, the faces of young climbers in the photographs. And a short note about whose memory the whole thing was built in. A young Briton who came off the Matterhorn in the winter of '79. The trust the family built out of its own grief worked 34 years later as a form of identification. He was identified through a charity that had grown out of his own death. If the Convilles had done nothing back then except mourn their son, a search on that surname wouldn't have returned a single line. Schrag writes to the family. Melissa will say afterwards that she understood immediately. She saw that the letter had come from a Swiss laboratory, and before she'd even opened it, she knew. Jonathan had been found. 3 days later, the sisters are in Switzerland. Melissa Conville and Katrina Tay identify their brother's equipment and give samples for comparison. Formal confirmation of identity will be completed in 2014, but the real recognition happens there, in the room they're shown into. What exactly they were shown was said best by Katrina herself. There was a mummified hand, cupped, as if it were waiting to be taken. 34 years had gone by, Katrina says, and I was holding my brother's hand. That's the only description this needs. A younger sister holding the hand of a 27-year-old man who was her older brother. Across those 34 years, the age gap between them had turned around and started running the other way. Katrina will call that same meeting bitter and right at the same time. Two words people don't usually put next to each other. And she's honest about the other side of it too. The find lifted up everything that had seemed long since lived through. The grief came back sharp and raw, exactly as it had been in the first year. 3 decades of waiting had done nothing at all to prepare her for that day. And still, the family got something it hadn't had since the winter of '79. Not the truth. They'd known the truth all along, not an answer. What happened on that face had been clear from the very beginning. What they got was the physical chance to say goodbye, a specific place, a specific day, and a person you can go and visit. The letters Anne Conville sent to the Zermatt police that winter did get an answer in the end. It took 34 years to arrive, it didn't come in an envelope, and it didn't come from the police, and by then it was addressed to her daughters. A little over a year later, this same glacier pushed out 2 Japanese climbers, the same 2 we talked about in the middle of the episode. Different countries, different decades, different lengths of time under the ice. 44 years for them, 34 for Jonathan. And they came out almost one after the other. Jonathan in the summer of 13, the Japanese climbers in the autumn of 14. And the list isn't closed. Around 250 people are still out there in these mountains, never found. Jonathan Conville's remains were cremated. The ashes stayed in Zermatt. They never went home to England. The family left him at the foot of the mountain he had wanted to be under, and in that sense, Katrina had been right as far back as '79. And now, the reason this story was saved for last. We've gone through 7 ways of not coming back from one mountain. A guide and his partner, killed by a chance rock on their own face. A rope team who radioed down that everything was fine and ceased to exist 2 hours later. A skier who lost his balance in the first few meters of the descent he'd dreamed about. A solo climber on a baking summer mountain. 2 Japanese climbers the ice held for 44 years. 2 friends with half a century of friendship behind them, frozen in a storm while crews sat in the valley ready to fly, waiting on the weather. The 6 stories before this one share a frame. After the death, what's left is memory. A bell in the valley, a training course carrying somebody else's name. A name that came back to a family 45 years later. Memory looks backwards, towards the person who isn't there anymore, and nobody asks anything more of it than that. This one has a sequel, and the sequel is about the living. More than 5,000 young people have received from the Jonathan Conville Memorial Trust exactly what he himself didn't have: skill, preparation, and the habit of turning back in time. The Trust has had the same statement of purpose since day one: to support in them the appetite for adventure, precisely the one that once drove Jonathan. The Trust is still running today, and every year somebody who came through it walks back down off a mountain because they know how it's done. The mountain doesn't give meaning back. The meaning was made by the people below.